Hi, welcome to Ecology of Socialization. So what we're going to cover is a few of the aims or purposes of socialization. Why do we socialize? Well, we do it to understand developmental tasks, to develop self-concept, self-esteem, self-regulation, and all of that self-development is part of our identity formation. It's also to empower achievement and to teach appropriate social goals. Because again, socialization is about being a member of the social environment. So, what are developmental tasks? They are tasks that lie between an individual need and a societal demand. So, things like sleeping arrangements, right? You have the individual need of the child, and then maybe wanting to sleep with the parents. And then the societal demand on parents to have to work and have demanding schedules and maybe need more time alone to sleep rather than co-sleeping. Other things like independence, right? How much independence are we encouraging within our child depending on different demands on the family and expectations? So self-concept, they believe, is typically achieved by 18 months when you understand that you're a self, right? So children can look in the mirror when they're young and don't understand that they're seeing themselves. It takes some time. And so again, when they start to realize that they are separate from others and that what they do can affect others, that's the development of the self or the self-concept. Now, self esteem, on the other hand, is partially like self worth. It's the value that we place on our identity. So, again, self esteem is highly influenced by our caregivers, our peers, and other influences from our environment. So, how do we build strong self esteem? Again, through a positive environment, through praise and encouragement, to recognizing and celebrating milestones with the child, things that they're able to accomplish, giving love and support, allowing opportunities to succeed, setting up the environment so that the child is able to be successful. Talk, listen, play, laugh, right? Engage with the child. But when we ridicule or shame, that builds low self esteem. And then also be aware of what is the child observing? What are they witnessing? What is being modeled for them? Because if we have low self-esteem and act out in certain ways, the child would also, see that and that would influence their self-esteem. So what are some benefits of high self-esteem? Well, you're able to handle stronger emotions like, oops, sorry. Um, which comes into play with self-regulation. How do you regulate the emotions that you feel? Well, again, when we have high self-esteem, we typically have more positive and healthy relationships. And we also take responsibility, right? We kind of understand how others might feel, and we take that into account through the development of high self-esteem. Okay, so what is self-regulation? It's the ability to handle our emotions, right? And impulses, behavior, emotions, right? Those all come into play when we're regulating ourselves. And again, we have to realize that there's certain times that are appropriate um, for that expression, or an object is appropriate, right? Versus what's not appropriate in a societal sense. So the role of early relationships is crucial because a child will witness and observe how their caregivers self-regulate, right? So were your parents ones that got um, easily frazzled? You know, people who easily are frazzled tend to have a harder time self-regulating, right? Whereas you might know others who have never really showed that they were upset, or if they did, it was more, um, subdued than extreme. So children learn this as they get older on how to self regulate their own behavior and emotions. Okay, so again, the ability to self regulate is the ability to calm yourself down when you're upset, cheer yourself up when you're down. So, again, you might think of people in your lives or maybe even yourself who has a difficult time doing that. And again, life plays into it, experiences, there's so many things that play into our self regulation. But think about you as a parent or caregiver, right? If you're going to work with children or have your own children and you experience some bad news, cost to fix a car, it's going to be $5,000, your job is ending at the end of the month. Well, what are ways that we can react to this news? Well, there's both positive and negative, right? And think about how your reaction then contributes to that child's development of their own self regulation, right? So here's an example. My job is ending at the end of the month. A positive reaction and something that I could model for my child is now I'm pushed to seek new employment. I'm going to be excited about that. I redid my resume. I got my interview outfits ready. I can grow in my field. I wanted up other opportunities. So, kind of taking a positive spin on it versus a negative reaction of maybe panicking, blaming the job, complaining. That's not a great model for the child, right? And they learn then how to react to things in a more negative way. So you just again have to think about how your role as a caregiver really influences a child and how they react to the things around them. All right, so let's get into identity. So Eric Erickson is our identity theorist. And he developed a theory that really focused on children going through different stages, and the outcomes of those stages then contribute to who that child is or becomes. Every outcome contributes to that child's identity. So you can see here, Erickson was alive for most of the 1900s, so he saw a lot in terms of different cultures, different families, and how we've kind of generationally changed over time. His theory is called the psychosocial theory. He was a student of Freud. He had a lot of experience in observing and putting himself in different cultures and kind of observing how different families and societies how they interact. He was really interested in the development of identity and decided to focus his stages on the lifespan. So his stages go all the way into adulthood. He believed that we have a psychosocial conflict within each stage. And again, that's the name of his theory. He believed that the psycho is the child, the social is the environment, and how they get along basically will determine how that child goes through each stage, whether it's a more positive or a more negative outcome. So the role of culture, caregiving, our experiences, our relationships really play into the outcomes for every stage. So here they are in a nice little table. So you can see the name of all 8 of his stages, what developmental stage it is, so what age group, and what is the task that is hopefully the positive that is being developed. So we want them to develop trust, autonomy, independence, initiative, feelings of competence, understanding the changing self, developing intimacy, right? These are all positives. So again, these outcomes don't happen with every child, but hopefully is the goal in terms of being a positive caregiver who helps children develop positively through all of these stages. Okay, so Erickson was a Freudian student. Freud's theory stopped at adolescence, and Erickson went on and developed it all the way through the lifespan and connected with culture and how culture played into every stage. Again, every stage, there's that major psychosocial task. Is it trust or mistrust, autonomy or shame or doubt? So, are they going to accomplish that or maybe have to overcome the negative outcome? Every stage, every outcome contributes to a child's identity. Previous stages affect the next stages, right? So things can change, but if we're consistent, they're probably going to have similar outcomes every stage. And it may not consider all cultures. For example, all cultures don't see adolescence as a time for exploration, right? So, we have to take into account who Erickson was observing, who, and that again, it doesn't easily fit every child, every culture. But it's a great theory to think of in terms of children's development. Okay, there's other methods of socialization: affective, observational, cognitive, and sociocultural. So let's first look at affective, which is through having an effect, right? Feelings, emotions, person to person interactions, relationships. So there's responses, there's feelings not only about yourself, but about others, and expressing those feelings and emotion. Now, the most common way that we see this in connecting to theory is attachment theory. So, attachment is that tie, that bond, that connection that one person forms to another person. And I love this phrase here: binding them together in space and enduring over time, right? When you form that attachment bond with someone, it doesn't just end when maybe you move away from each other or someone passes, it continues. So, it's a very strong relationship that can be lifelong. So, Bowlby and Ainsworth are the attachment theorists that covered different parts of attachment theory. So, Bowlby, he was our theorist that thought about how do children actually develop their attachment. Well, he believed first we're not really discriminate, meaning as long as someone is caring for us, we will be content. So again, that typically is a great time for children to be adopted. They haven't really formed a bond yet with their biological caregiver, so they can now form a bond with their adoptive parents and kind of start right from the beginning. Well, as we see at about 6 weeks and for the next few months, they do start to show preference and they start to develop trust primary caregivers. By 6 to 8 months to, a year and a half to almost 2 years, they are clearly attached. They look to this person, when they have needs, and typically will go through separation anxiety and stranger anxiety when separated from them. And then what he believed was by going through those 2 years of experiences, they now understand how to have relationships moving forward. Now, is it always positive relationships? Well, it depends on how they were raised, right? How were they influenced as they went through these phases? Now, Ainsworth, I didn't really mention her. She then talked about how we see different styles of attachment. So if you've heard of like secure attachment versus insecure attachment, that is Ainsworth, and her name is Mary Ainsworth. And I think we'll talk about her at a later time. Or if you take my child psychology class, you will hear all about her. Okay, what are more observational methods, right? So we've been talking about those. And it's really through modeling. And that's a lot of how children learn about themselves is by how behavior is modeled through others. So I have examples here, right? We see dad reading, we want to read. If we see mom eating an apple, we want to eat fresh fruit. And then I have this cute video here I'll show you just in a second. I want to make sure my volume is working so you guys can see kittens and how they even model for their children. And here we go. So notice the baby is trying to copy the mom and learns how to care for him or herself through the modeling of the mother. Right. So it goes on and on, but I mean, you get the point. Okay, so cognitive methods of socialization are things like instructing children. We do that a lot, right? Go get your shoes, go get your backpack. It's time to wash your hands. And we also set standards, right? Especially as parents. Like, I expect good behavior when we go to the grocery store. I expect A's and B's on your report card. And many times we give reasoning behind it, right? Why do we want that? Well, we share with our friends so that everybody has an opportunity, right? The more explanation we give and reasoning, the more children understand and can connect with the reasons behind behavior. Then we had the sociocultural methods, right? What are things in our culture that influence us? Group pressure, right? Drugs, alcohol. What are the traditions that we're exposed to? Maybe cooking with grandma and different, foods in our family, rituals, routines like graduating high school or college, peace symbols, right? All of those things influence who we are. And sometimes literally it can just be a symbol or it can be deeper, like family traditions. All right, so socialization of the family. So again, families have cultural differences, right? We might come from a collectivist orientation or individualistic. We might be active or passive in our coping styles. We might be more submissive or egalitarian in our attitude toward authority, or we might be more open and expressive in communication, or maybe more restrained in private. So I have some pictures here for you guys. Are you a collectivist family? Maybe a large family that has to work together to get everybody ready and fed and the chores done? Or was your family more individualistic, where maybe this individual child was allowed to kind of express their wants and have those needs met? Was your coping style active, where you sat and talked to your parents about problems, or maybe more passive, where it was just maybe ignored? What about your attitude toward authority? Were you expected to be submissive and just listen and follow directions, no explanation? Or is it more egalitarian, where you had a voice, your parents had a voice, and there was communication? And again, that connects with communication. Were you open and expressive or more restrained and private? So think about those and reflect on them before you go back to Blackboard and complete this week's assignments. So, outcomes of socialization. Again, when we are socialized, do we value money? Do we value work? Do we have a positive or negative attitude? Do we think that we failed because we didn't study? Or do we think that we failed because we're stupid? Right? Well, that depends on whether we have high or low self esteem, whether we're able to regulate our emotions. What are our morals? Understanding, gender roles or psychological, those are things that we put onto the different sexes. So socialization, although we don't necessarily see it, is happening constantly and is happening within everyday interactions. So if we kind of put it all together, our agents and our outcomes, I can think of my culture. How are young females, what are their expectations? Young males, adult females, adult males, orientation, coping style, authority, and communication. So I put, what the expectations were for me as a young female, the expectation for my brother as a young male, both of the roles of my parents that I kind of saw growing up, and what I felt we were very individualistic, more passive, more submissive, and more restrained in private, which then influenced who I became and what kind of parent I became. All right, so please go back to Blackboard and complete this week's tasks. Thank you, everybody.